Hi, everyone, and welcome to Valley of Depth. I'm your host, Mo Islam. My guest today is Hamdullah Mohib, CEO of Orbitworks. Hamdullah's journey is rare. He served at the highest levels of government in Afghanistan, first as ambassador to the United States, and later as national security advisor to the president, where he was responsible for national security strategy, crisis decision-making, and international coordination. Today, he's building a commercial satellite manufacturing and services company in Abu Dhabi. We talk about how his background led him to co-found Marlan Space, a UAE-based space investment and operating company, and how Marlan partnered with Loft Orbital to launch Orbitworks. We explore the idea that space is ultimately about sovereignty, about making faster decisions with more control, and what it means when the Middle East starts building, not just buying space capability. Let's jump in. Hamdullah, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Mo, for having me.
Yeah. You know, you're my first guest from the region, so I feel honored that you've joined us here today.
Well, thank you. And we're also a new industry in the region. We're the only satellite A&T facility that has been built commercially it's not uncommon that I would be the first one speaking here.
Fair enough. Well, before we talk about Orbitworks, I do want to talk a bit about your career path as far as space, because it is a bit unconventional compared to the folks that I typically interview here. You know, you've served at the highest levels of diplomacy and national security in Afghanistan, and now you're building a space infrastructure company in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Tell me a little bit about your path from government and geopolitics to the space industry.
So I think it may look unnatural and unconventional, but what I did in government was quite similar to what we're doing here now. And that is focus on sovereignty and enabling sovereign nations to be able to make decisions quickly and in a timely manner, but also efficiently and with more control at their disposal. I think Orbitworks, when we were forming, that was the main goal, thinking about how can, first of all, this region, which is very hot, as you know, both politically and also weather-wise. But so you want to be able to make decisions to enable the governments here to be able to make decisions quickly and efficiently. But then looking at the broader region, there is quite a significant amount of interest in satellite services, and we think we're addressing that need.
So when you were operating in government, how did you think about space at the time? Was it on your mind? Was it part of your own sort of agenda at the time, or was it something like, hey, at some point in my career, I'd like to get into this industry?
It was a key interest. Being able to have the kind of visibility that airborne units provide you it can be the deciding factor between a life saved or a life lost. We unfortunately in Afghanistan didn't have access to satellite services and imagery. At the time, we didn't. Of course, our allies did, and sometimes we utilized them, but we ourselves didn't have access. And it always piqued my interest to see what else can be done with those services. Being in an area that was conflict driven and not being able to access population centers, a government which had to plan a budget, not just security element, but planning a budget and being able to prepare for providing people with services. Sometimes we also relied on satellite imagery. As much as even population density calculation was done through satellite imagery. Now, those services didn't come from us. They came from the UN at the time, but they were able to give us the kind of insights that helped us govern better. And so it has always been an area of interest for me. and understood that it has broader capacity than what we were exposed to. And I can see that being proven with every day in my job now.
For someone, so let's just dive into Orbitworks for a second here. So for someone hearing about the company for the first time, and my assumption is that there are a number of folks who are listening to this who may be hearing about it for the first time, considering it is also a relatively new project. How do you explain the company, maybe and what the actual and what you guys do right now?
So the way I would describe Orbitworks is a satellite manufacturer at its core, at start. We partnered with another firm that built satellite services in the U.S. and also has a base in Europe to piggyback on their flight heritage and expertise to build and jumpstart a satellite manufacturing capability here in Abu Dhabi. That's at its core. We're working on a constellation that would be largely serving this region, but not exclusively. We're talking to customers in Europe and in the broader region, in the broader MENA region, but also Africa and Southeast Asia to use that constellation for their needs.
Mm-hmm. And this other company is Loft Orbital?
Loft Orbital, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about that partnership, because it's not just Loft Orbital, right? There's another entity here, Marlan Space, which you were involved in. Tell me about sort of that partnership and what each entity brings to the table.
So Marlan Space is an investor operator based in the UAE, and Loft Orbital is a San Francisco-based company that also has offices in Toulouse and also in Golden, and they built satellites and constellations for customers, both commercial and also federal. They have another entity called Loft Federal that's focused on government services. We partnered with them because we really liked their model. We are starting from scratch, and the model that Loft offered was not a specific set of hardware, but more a knowledge transfer that we could rely on and build, and then start to build our own capabilities as we go along. So we liked that they were business focused and that they were focused on building satellites, and which is what we wanted to build here. And so we partnered with them, and Orbitworks was formed. We built the facility here in Abu Dhabi, actually not far from where I'm sitting. It's about between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. There's a reason why we put it in this place called KEZAD. And what the facility is finished last year in November. We launched it in November. We started in December 2024 and finished it in November and launched it in November 2025. We have full staff that we hired from across the world, including the US, Europe, here in the region, India, and we are still building our staff capability. But we have a full team that's working on the first constellation now. As I said, our first satellite would be launched in October this year.
So I want to go back. So you use the word "we" a number of times. When you say "we," are you referring to the UAE? Are you like sort of speaking on behalf of the UAE and the region? I'm curious because Marlan Space obviously has deep ties with the government of UAE. So maybe tell me a little bit about sort of the perspective that you're using there.
When I say we say Orbitworks because it's a joint venture. It's a joint venture between Marlan Space and Loft Orbital. But also the model that we have applied for building Orbitworks is quite similar to a lot of Silicon Valley companies. The employees are also owners. They have shares. They have equity in the company. And so when I say we, I am inclusive of all of us, both our partner Loft, but also the staff, the employees that are part of Orbitworks.
So tell me more about the decision to partner with Loft Orbital, right? Because we've had Pierre Damien on the show in the past, and we're familiar with the Loft model. But tell us a little bit about what appealed to you within the Loft model as far as partnership goes, because there's a lot of companies out there in the satellite bus space. We've covered them. It's competitive, and I'm certain that there are a number of other partners that you could have chosen. Tell us a little bit about what made the partnership with Loft particularly interesting and aligned with your goals.
We liked the Loft model because it's not tied to a single piece of hardware. And so we can attract hardware. We could buy hardware from Europe, from America, from right now we are acquiring some payloads from South Africa. So we're going global to acquire all of those hardware. We did not want to be tied to a single piece of hardware that would require years of modification if we need to modify it for an application, because we're new. We're starting a completely new industry, and there is no commercial space manufacturing capabilities here. There are some research centers, but there are also the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center that builds satellites. Those are quite bespoke services that they have for largely federal needs. And to be able to build a commercial satellite company, we needed to be as flexible as we could be. And with the Loft model, what they have proprietary is the hub, which sits between the bus and the payload, and then cockpit that lets us operate it. And that's their proprietary technology. Then we can switch between buses and payloads as we like, depending on what kind of customer we serve. We wanted to build a company, and we could build from scratch. We could start building our own bus. We could start also building our own payloads. But to be able to do it faster and start serving customers, we could start with this model where it's quicker. And we in the process, as we bring our team together, we also learn. But we learn in the process of serving customers. And then when we are ready to commit to a single piece of hardware, a bus, maybe perhaps, we can then go and make that kind of a partnership or start building it ourselves. But right from the outset, we didn't know if we could commit to a hardware fixed company model, because we didn't know what kind of customer demands there are going to be. We could expect some, but we don't know all of the customer demands. And we wanted to have that level of flexibility, which will allow us to serve a wide array of clients, especially in the early years. When Orbitworks is mature and we know the products that it's going to fix, its focus on, it would be a different story.
So is the partnership with Loft currently structured as like a JV? Is it a licensing agreement? What does that partnership look like?
It's a joint venture. We have access to their technology, and they will have access to whatever we develop here at Orbitworks, which they are. Altair, the constellation that we're building together, because we're still borrowing quite a lot of expertise from Loft. But it's a UAE native, UAE built, UAE designed, and largely engineered here product that Loft will have access to. So we are in our first year now. We are in the first year of operation, I would say, because last year we were busy building the team and the facility. We are already contributing to their product line. So we have that reciprocal agreement in which we both benefit from each other's knowledge and the products we build.
And then my final question on just more of the origin. Did this partnership come together as sort of necessity, meaning like you were looking for a partner, or was there kind of the original thought process around Orbitworks is like, hey, let's try it, like we should develop the technology and everything from the ground up, but then it just so happened that this partnership kind of arose and it made sense. Like I'm curious, from the very beginning, were you thinking about it from the perspective of a partnership, partnering with another kind of organization that has built XYZ already that we can kind of integrate into our own into the region?
It actually was an evolutionary process. We started with, in Marlan Space as an investment company, where was investing in space funds. Valerian is one of those funds that we invested in. And so we were looking at what other companies exist. And there are some direct investments that Marlan Space also made in True Anomaly. So we were looking at companies and scouting space companies, knowing that there is a UAE policy interest in building native capabilities. We wanted to see what is available, but then there is also an element of long-term partnership with Loft. Loft, a founder, peer, spent quite a significant amount of time here in the UAE. His uncle used to be here, an advisor to the Air Force, and spent some early time on the at the space agency when it was being developed, advising and helping with the space agency's development. So it was a natural fit for multiple reasons. One, we liked the business model. Second, we liked that team and the founders' commitment to the UAE. When you are forming, when we're talking to founders or companies, they don't always understand the region well enough to understand how to do business, but also the level of patience required to do business here. And so with Loft, we had multiple of those things coming together. We had a founder who knew the region well and had long-standing commitments and a proven track record here. We also had a technology that we agreed and thought was going to be a good fit for it, and then the business model worked really well for us. And so all of those things came together, and we were able to form that joint venture.
I want to go on a slight tangent because you brought up something that is an interesting topic area for me. So you mentioned a founder who has expertise and connection to the region. There is no doubt a lot of founders and executives who travel to the Middle East, particularly the UAE, in search of capital. And tell me a little bit about the importance of building connectivity in the region before you make an ask, like, hey, we need, because I think the Middle East for a lot of Western founders is viewed as like, the capital of capital, like where there's a lot of investors and a potential to source, large funding rounds. It doesn't work like that, right? It's not that easy. So tell me a little bit about the importance of actually building, some type of route or, kind of long-standing connection there in the region.
So you're absolutely right. A lot of founders come to the Middle East thinking, especially the GCC region and in the UAE, to raise money, and they are singularly focused on that agenda, which can sometimes be counterproductive because they probably don't spend enough time in building relationships, which is something that is necessary. But they are successful in being able to raise money because there are investors who would like to put money in technologies, and there are quite sophisticated investors that would look at largely American startups based on their track record. They're quite sophisticated in their investment thesis. So as much as you can raise money from a US VC, you can also raise it from family offices and venture capital funds here in the region. That happens. I would say the ones that are more successful, who are able to repeatedly come back, usually look at those long-term relationships and build partnerships. In the GCC, most of the countries are looking to deploy their funds in such a way that would also create some in-country value. And so most of the sovereign wealth funds have now adopted an in-country value creation formula in which they expect you to do something here. And then there is also in the UAE specifically partnership being encouraged, because what it does is it doesn't just deploy capital, it also creates a knowledge-based economy, which is what the UAE is very intensely focused on. To move away from the oil economy and create a knowledge-based economy, they need to deploy their capital more effectively. And our partnership is a good example of that. This is not just yet another project, but it's a strategic project that is going to create not just the sovereign capability to build space assets, but also the knowledge base that would be required to build on it. And hopefully, in the next decade, when you think of 10 places to buy space assets, satellites, you would think of Abu Dhabi as one of those places to be. And so that would be an achievement. And I think founders should start thinking about how they can fit into that model when they come to Abu Dhabi to raise money, but also maybe contribute more value here that they could create a more permanent presence.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're going to talk a bit more about the region specifically, but I do want to jump back to Orbitworks now. So tell me about the Altair constellation. That's the first major program. What is that? What is that going to look like?
So Altair is our first effort at building our own native constellation that serves multiple purposes. One, we want to move away from providing satellite imagery, which is what largely most of the current customers are buying, to information-based services and satellite as a service. And so we have multiple sensors on our satellites, and then we have onboard compute. The product we're building is to enable both commercial and sovereign clients to have information. So, as an example, one of the examples for our region would be oil companies. Let's say you're ADNOC. You have really nice imagery of your facilities in the sea, and you have your installations on the ground, storage facilities, pipelines. But what you're more interested in is how do you ensure the safety of your installations, and if there is a gas leak or an oil spill, that you be informed. And that's what we are trying to do. Turn Altair into an application based and application focused constellation that serve for, of course, limited, but focused on certain clients that can that'll be able to make decisions quicker, save some money, and it would be a constellation as a service that we offer.
And you mentioned both sovereign and commercial. Is the, I mean, where do you think the near term sort of opportunity is? Right? Is it, are you truly focusing on this dual use capability, or do you foresee perhaps the government being a larger use case for this constellation?
Well, no space company can survive without a government being one of the anchor customers. So obviously, we will have a significant amount of focus on serving sovereign clients more than commercial. But in the process, we're building our application so that it is really dual use. And there are a lot of applications. Like I said, we can do satellites are already used for a lot of civilian services that are underrated, perhaps because corporations are not as deep pocketed clients. So satellite manufacturers or service providers have largely focused on sovereign clients, which I think is unfortunate, because I think it has also stifled innovation in this space. And we want to we want to at least have a significant amount of our focus on those commercial clients, and be able to serve them with applications that will solve their problems. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of clients can we serve. The oil companies, for example, is just a very obvious example because they're right here in this region, has an immediate need, but the applications are quite enormous, from population density management, smart cities, to autonomous vehicles, and the management of traffic. The services are unlimited. It's just how well we use those sensors. So on our satellite, we have 5 sensors, and we want to see how a combination of those sensors could be used to serve a diversity of clients.
What is the architecture of the constellation? So how many satellites is it going to look like? When are those going to be launched? And when will the constellation be at its sort of mature state?
The first constellation is 10 satellites. First one is being launched in October this year. And then we will have the other 9 launched throughout 2027. And so by the end of 2027, we should have all 10 in orbit. And that's when by the end of 2027, when it will be at its peak capacity.
Got it. Okay, and let's go back and talk about the manufacturing facility that you're building. So that's, you said, between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And tell me the name of the exact location again.
Well, the short acronym is KEZAD, but KEZAD. The long name is Khalifa Park. KEZAD stands for what its description is. Yeah.
So, is there a strategic reason for KEZAD being the location of the facility? Tell me a little bit about like the actual facility that you're building, where it stands today, and because I think you had mentioned earlier that there is a strategic. It's in a location of strategic importance.
Well, we're trying to solve for many problems, and one of them is staffing, attracting talent to come to the UAE and work. And so we wanted to have a location that is equidistant from Abu Dhabi and Dubai. People's preference of living lifestyle can be different. Dubai is a more active and energetic place, but people with families largely prefer Abu Dhabi because it's quieter, schools and traffic is a little bit less hectic. And so we wanted to be somewhere where if you are, we could attract people that could live in either places. And so it's about 45 minutes from both Dubai and Abu Dhabi on a highway. And it is on a highway. It has access to a seaport. So it's logistically quite well accessible. It's also this industrial park is part of 80 ports, Abu Dhabi ports, but named after the former president. So it had symbolic reasons and also quite practical logistical reasons for us to be in this place. And it's one of the easily accessible industrial parks to 80 ports.
Where is is there a part of Dubai, Abu Dhabi that you feel like is starting to see a space kind of ecosystem, right? Because in the US you can say LA, Denver, there's a couple different areas. Is there anything like that that's already formed or forming? Is KEZAD perhaps one of those places? I'm just kind of curious as far as that kind of element of, when you have a density of companies that are being built, especially around kind of space and defense in an area, there's a lot of talent sharing. There's a lot of kind of natural innovation that occurs just by having those types of companies near each other.
So their ambitions, since there isn't a commercial space ecosystem yet, they're quite spread out. Companies are spread out. So we have startups that are in Masdar City, for example, which is where also the UAE Space Agency is. Unfortunately, the buildings there are not too industrial. The kind of industrial manufacturing that we were doing, we're building, we couldn't be in Masdar City. And then there is Tawazun Industrial Park, which where a lot of defense companies are, including U.S. defense companies, are based in Tawazun Industrial Park. Again, for us, it didn't work because we were focused on commercial models. So KEZAD for us was a really good place, both logistically, but also the kind of freedoms we wanted to operate. We also needed to be onshore, not to be one of those industrial free zones, because to qualify for made in the UAE label, it had to be onshore. So I think as the industry grows, it will really depend on the type of company and where it makes commercial sense for companies to be. We certainly learned a ton of through experience as we were building Orbitworks. What works, the heights, what it takes for a satellite or a space company to build its operations here or facilities. And happy to lend that information to any companies who would like to set up shop here, on just guiding them on where to go and where to begin. Since it's an early start for this region, and we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. So we would like to help other companies be attracted. If they were payload manufacturers here, we wouldn't have to secure payloads from other nations and go through huge bureaucratic hurdles in getting the licenses and the export permissions to be granted. So we'd be very happy to see more space companies be stationed around. We'd encourage them to be where we are, so they're closer to us. But if they choose to be in one of the other locations, I think the accessibility in UAE is it's a small country by comparison, so it's not as large as the US, where it takes an hour and a half to go from Abu Dhabi to Dubai on a highway. The road infrastructure is really good. And within Abu Dhabi, everything is literally 30 minutes away. The infrastructure is built in such a way that you're always within a half an hour distance from your other location to be at. So I don't know, and I cannot predict which exact location will be the focus, but I think it's going to be one of those industrial parks that are focused on space, who are trying to build space campuses.
Yeah. So I want to talk about talent. I mean, you mentioned that part of the reason why you've chosen the location is because of its distance between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and for talent. But how do you more broadly think about talent as you're building this team? Because you want to balance imported expertise, right, with building a local workforce that can sustain the industry long term. So how are you thinking about sort of the creation of the team right now and how it looks like over the next few years?
So our preference obviously is Emirati talent first. That comes in more of the softer skills that we need at Orbitworks. It's easier to find those. But for the more hardcore engineering talent, we are still relying on foreign talents, largely from Europe. That's where we have had best luck at attracting talent, but also from the region in India. India has some good space talent that we have been able to attract. And the long-term goal would be to localize those capabilities. So we are, and it's part of our program. It's part of our process as we develop Orbitworks.
Yeah. So I want to spend a few minutes just talking about the UAE, the Middle East, and space as like a strategic domain. Now, throughout the show so far, you've talked a little bit about space as a priority for the Middle East and as a new priority, I should say. I am curious, like the broader Middle East region, like how would you characterize the state of the space sector, right? And I'm curious also within the confines of like which parts of the region are more mature than others. And the reason why I ask is like, let's just take UAE, for example, right? Over look at the last few years, the UAE has sent a probe to Mars, right? You've had astronauts in space via Axiom. Saudi is taking similar, has taken space in a very similar, or has taken a similar perspective in that it is also a national priority. I'm curious, like, what are you seeing, both within region and across region? Like, how important is space? I mean, for example, in the U.S., we now have a very, very commercial NASA administrator. We also have a White House who has just recently put on an executive order saying that they want humans on the moon, directing that they want humans on the moon in the next few years. It's become thrusted into the national spotlight. Now, obviously, part of that is also SpaceX going public and becoming, what could be the biggest IPO ever. So tell me a little bit about how the region is thinking about space from a national security perspective.
The entire region in the GCC is actively working to see what kind of niche they can create in the space industry. It's going to grow. This is a very natural flow of business people. There is need. There is going to be more satellites in space in the next decade. A lot more services tied to satellite services, and even if there are no commercial services here, governments have been engaged on space programs. The UAE has certainly been very active, as you mentioned, in space. But commercially too, as the economies are diversified in the GCC, they're looking at high-tech industries to attract, because this is that's how they're going to be able to successfully diversify industry, and they have some success in tech industry, especially in the UAE. On the AI front, we have quite successful enterprises that are serving both local and regional clients. So based on the success that we have already seen in AI infrastructure, space is something that the entire region is thinking about. So Oman is looking at a spaceport in Duqm. It's a good location for it to be able to launch now. The Saudis have a lot of services. They have a company funded by PIF that is looking at attracting space companies to again localize their services. The UAE is very ambitious in attracting the kind of companies that we are, for example, working at. And then there are other active companies. We have another sister company called Space 42, which is used to be formerly known as Yasat and Thuraya. They merged with another geospatial intelligence company called Bayanat and formed Space 42. They're the Edge Group, which is a defense prime in the UAE, has their own space company. So there is definitely a deep sense in the government that they need to build a commercial space sector. And that will continue to grow as more and more startups and companies come up. There are quite a few startups, actually, payload manufacturers. There is a company that is trying to enter the data centers in space race. There are other manufacturers, companies that are trying to build payloads for and propulsion units. So I think the ecosystem will grow over the next decade, and it may attract more international partnerships. primes that have previously provided services are also taking a notice and are trying to form partnerships here. Space companies like Airbus and Thales have been quite active in the past, and they're seeing that they're losing ground to these upstarts and maybe some startups. And so they are also looking at forming partnerships within GCC. I think the UAE may be the most advanced in this sector, but I think the ambition is definitely alive in the rest of GCC as well.
Do you think that so that is reflected in sort of the priorities of the sovereign wealth funds? I'm curious if you have a perspective on that. Meaning, like, I heard once in the past that PIF has a specific kind of internal, I won't call it mandate, but let's just say strategic initiative to deploy a certain level of capital within the space industry. Have you seen anything like that in other funds as to how the investment entities are thinking about space?
So the UAE had been quite active in that we have these responsibilities for defense primes, for example, called offsets. And one of the first satellite integrator that was built by Airbus. It's part of UAE University in Al Ain. It's called NSSTC, and that was part of an offset program, which the government here forces defense companies to create in-house value. It's not tax. The companies would love to just pay tax and make it easy for themselves, but the government forces them when they receive a government contract, especially in defense sector, that a certain amount of value must be created locally. And so companies are always looking at, commercial companies or defense companies from the US and Europe are constantly looking at projects where they can fulfill their obligations. But it's also in the strategic investment policy. So ADIO, which is the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, has a set of criteria and priorities, areas in which they would like to focus, which is then used by sovereign wealth funds to focus on those areas. And space is one of those 5 strategic areas that they're encouraged to spend money on creating in-country value.
Understood. Okay, very helpful. Hamdullah, I want to go back to your leadership and your a bit about your background. I am curious, like, from your time working in government, what are sort of lessons within, leadership lessons that have proven the most useful to you as you're kind of building Orbitworks now? And what are some lessons that you want to forget as far as efficiency in operating in a commercial environment?
Commercial environment is less bureaucratic, and I enjoy that part. But there can be a lot of parallels in terms of the amount of priorities that one is focused on. We can very easily get distracted by a large number of tasks and shiny objects. What I find quite useful is taking a step back and looking at what we're doing and how much of our time is spent on achieving those objectives and what's doable and what's not. A big part of the I think the similarities between building something so significant like a space manufacturing capability and the similarities with government challenges are they're usually very large challenges and difficult and complex, and it's important to be able to break them down and set milestones that are more achievable in short term, and we can track them. And so, as we were building, for example, the Orbitworks as a company, we had to break down our challenges. We're solving for 3 major problems. We're solving for, first of all, we needed to build a large clean room. It's 5,000 square feet, or 50,000 square feet facility, 5,000 square meter. And the clean room alone is about 1,500 or 15,000 square feet. And so we're building for a challenge that hasn't been achieved. And the kind of environment we are, it's a desert. There is it can get very hot. We have a lot of power requirements, and because it's hot, we run ACs, which can make the environment dry. So the clean room now needs a whole new solution instead of um, uh, trying to solve for creating a clean environment. We needed to add some humidity, not reduce it. So there were like really technical challenges, and then getting the equipment. But the other two challenges we had to solve for, which are not as visible and are not tangible, is building the supply chain. Being able to you can have a facility, but if you don't have the right supply chain and be able to acquire the payloads and the tools necessary, there is no product. And the third challenge there was building the staff, the company itself, and in a place where we attract talent from all over the world, and they come in with all kinds of different cultures. So if you are a US-based company, or European or Europe-based company, you can attract talent, and you acquire much of it from within your culture. And then those that come from outside adapt to that native culture. In a place like ours, you have to create your own. It is, what kind of culture are we creating in our company? And so we're breaking these problems into smaller areas, more manageable areas, and then negotiating with our investors and negotiating with our suppliers to ensure that we have continuity of service. And so I would say that the challenges maybe not as far wide as I initially may have thought.
Right. Yeah. As far as the sort of the capital structure of the company, it is. I'm just curious on this point. So it is a joint venture between Marlan and Loft Orbital. Have you taken in outside capital? Do you plan to, or will it be? I mean, I say this because Marlan itself is an investment entity. How are you thinking about sort of the long-term build out from of the company, from capex needs to obviously more strategic capital?
In addition to our main LP, we also have one strategic investor from the UAE that we took on board. It was more for strategic reasons at the time, but we will in the future look at increasing our cap table and attracting more LPs on board. So that would be our focus for the next years to come as we try to grow, when we are ready to grow.
Got it. Are you able to share how much capital has been raised so far?
So the initial investment was north of $100 million from our main investor. And then we also raised about 5% from another strategic investor that post our investment. And since then, we have not raised third-party capital yet. So we're waiting. Like I said, when we are ready for growth, we would go out to the market then.
Understood.
We're well capitalized for the time being.
So looking out into the future, if Orbitworks succeeds at the highest level in terms of your goals, how do you see it changing the Middle East's role in the global space economy?
So we are a big user and an importer of space services, and the way ideally I would like this to see is to become a net exporter of space services, whether that is satellites as a service or building constellations and physical assets for other sovereign clients as well as commercial clients. I think whether how long it will take, I'm not exactly sure how long it will take, but it will become a hotspot for space services. So and I see that ambition in the government, and I see it from the space agency and also the sovereign wealth funds. Investors are really looking at space as one of the main areas for development. So in the next decade or so, it will become a place for regional clients to come to acquire space assets, and I would like to see Orbitworks play a significant role in that. We are already, when we built it with the ambition that it's going to be an international company. So our first customers that we signed are in Europe. We're looking at US. We're not ignoring the northern hemisphere, and so we will be looking at customers in the US to attract. And so we're not going to be focused on the Middle East as our only customer base.
What now? Speaking more broadly, what excites you the most about the next decade in space?
It's a big question. Is very interesting because we have a lot of shiny objects, and it can be fascinating just looking at the amazing things being built, from asteroid mining to we're looking at data centers in space, humans, and the ambitions are quite exciting to see what the US and China are doing, and then other countries like the UAE and maybe perhaps Korea and Japan are doing in space. But what excites me about what I would say is the applications. One of the applications we're looking at quite closely, and we're going to have a panel on this at Davos, is the pharmaceutical industry and what benefits it adds to humans and to our livelihood. I mean, it's incredible that we can build organs and pharmaceutical pills that are more efficient and than what we can do on the ground. And so I think my prediction, and one of the reasons I'm so excited about this, is space will become an integral part of our day-to-day life. Right? As we have autonomous fridges ordering our grocery that is being delivered by autonomous vehicles and autonomous drones, it will integrate. Space will become such an integral part of that, from communication to directions to be able to live our day-to-day life. And without us even noticing it, we already have direct-to-device services on the phone. So I mean, we will be even more reliant and more accessibility to be more connected in the world. But then the kind of services that will come up that will help us govern better, that will help us save money and costs on operations, disaster recovery, becoming faster, healthcare improvements, all of what we are currently in the process of building. I mean, humanity is in the process of building, becoming real products in our day-to-day lives, is what I feel is that exciting future for space for all of us.
Yeah. Well said. And then, Hamdullah, I do have to ask, when you're not building Orbitworks and focusing on in building out the infrastructure of the UAE within space, what do you do for fun?
That is fun.
that's a lot of the I asked that question to a lot of executives, and that is the answer I get quite frequently, which is this is what I do for fun.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I know you are into music, and so that's one of your pet projects that you work on for entertainment. I unfortunately never developed any kind of hobbies in that way, and work has been a big part of my life and purpose. And I take I take enjoyment in building what we are building, and so that's life.
Yeah.
But perhaps I can maybe pick up some music lessons from you.
happy to provide them. No, I think look, you've had a fantastic career in both in government and now in commercial industry. So and you're working on very hard, challenging problems. And oftentimes when you're working on these types of problems, there's not really time to do much else. So I can certainly understand that perspective. But Hamdullah, I really appreciate you joining and shedding some light. Obviously, talking about Orbitworks, but also shedding some light on on sort of the region and what's going on within the region, because I do think that there needs to be more spotlight as to what's happening in the Middle East. Not only is there capital, but there's also strategic priority in really building out the infrastructure and the know-how and the services that are being provided out of the Middle East. And I do think over the next decade, you're going to see a lot of big changes. So we appreciate you shedding some light on that. So Hamdullah, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm really honored and to be part of this journey that this region is building a knowledge economy, and to be able to contribute in some small way. I feel extremely privileged and proud to do that.
That's right. Well, until next time, thank you.